Hey everybody, welcome back to the Down Commander Deck Dojo. Today we're going to be looking at Gonti, Lord of Luxury, and his treasure trove of tasty trinkets. Hey there, Planeswalkers. Welcome back to the Down Commander Deck Dojo. I'm your sensei, AJ, and before I start anything, I just want to say thank you for tuning in today. I'm really excited to bring you this deck tech. If you like what you see, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, share this video with your friends. All that stuff is super easy, it's free, and it helps out the channel a whole bunch. If you got something to say, write it down in the comments below. You love the deck, you hate the deck, I'm a scumbag for all these infinite combos. I didn't notice something in the deck that you did. Let me know. I would love to hear from you. If you want to talk to me any more about anything Magic related, maybe unrelated, go ahead and find me over on Twitter at Magus of the Salt. I look forward to hearing from any of you about virtually anything. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into the top-down section of today's deck tech. Welcome to the world of Kaladesh. Kaladesh is more than just a world. It's a living, breathing work of art. Clockwork automatons protect the city streets, and magnificent airships ferry travelers to and fro. Kaladesh owes its very nature to the ever-present lifeblood of the plane, ether. The ether on Kaladesh is tangible. The skies are full of it. Plants and trees twist to be closer to it, and the waterways trace patterns beneath it. The ether on Kaladesh even gives birth to its own form of life. The etherborn are an unforeseen byproduct of the ether refinement process. They exist in a constant state of flux, always moving toward a form that will be recycled back into the ether sphere. Their lifespan can range from a few months to a few years, and it is the fleeting nature of their existence that defines them. The politics of Kaladesh are as rich and diverse as the environment that surrounds them. The consulate seeks to bring the benefits of ether-based society to all in a safe, efficient manner. The renegades believe the consulate is concealing information and hindering innovation. Somewhere in between this web of chaos lies the commander of today's deck, Gonti, Lord of Luxury. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, is a 2/3 Etherborn rogue for 2 and 2 black. He has Death Touch, and when Gonti, Lord of Luxury, enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library. Exile one of them face down, then put the rest on the bottom of that library in a random order. For as long as that card remains exiled, you may look at it, you may cast it, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast it. Gonti is the leader of Kaladesh's criminal underground. As an Etherborn, he lives his life in a characteristically hedonistic fashion. We are first introduced to Gonti, Lord of Luxury, in the Magic story In the Dead of Night, by the brilliant Alison Lures. We meet them through the lens of Yahenni, undying partisan. About Gonti, Yahenni says, Gonti's residence is a marvel of stolen opulence, bedazzled filigree, embezzled decor. Glittery pens line the walls, and inside the cages is a small petting zoo of animal constructs. The connecting halls are lined with cabinet after cabinet of shimmering devices without a mass-production seal in sight. All secret, all stolen, all safe from the consulate's eager hand. We Etherborn are vain as a necessity, but Gonti's vanity knows no price tag. With the flavor of our commander out of the way, let's head into Sensei's strategy for today's deck. In a fashion worthy of our commander's penchant for spicy trinkets, today's deck is going to be a mono-black artifact deck. Our strategy is going to be to grind out our opponents by sacrificing and recurring our creatures and artifacts for value. Then, we're going to look at recycling powerful enter the battlefield triggers like the one on our commander. And finally, we're going to end the game with a powerful artifact-based combo. With all that out of the way, let's take our shoes off and dive into the deck dojo. We're going to start off this and every deck tech like every good commander deck should, with a strong foundation and rampant card draw. First up, we've got Wayfarer's Bauble, Burnished Heart, and Solemn Simulacrum, which are all going to put a basic land onto the battlefield. Then we've got Soul Ring, Everflowing Chalice, and Worn Power Stone, which are going to tap to add colorless mana to our mana pool. Then we've got Commander Sphere, Mind Stone, and Hedron Archive, which can all be sacrificed to draw us cards. Then we've got some artifacts that can tap for any color of mana. Cold Steel Heart is going to enter the battlefield tapped, and we're going to choose a color. Typically it's going to be black, but we can tap that for any color if we choose. Felwar Stone is going to tap to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. Then there's Cultivator's Caravan, Gilded Lotus, and Chromatic Lantern, which can all tap for any color of mana, and Chromatic Lantern is going to make our lands tap for any color too, which is especially important because we've got quite a few cards that are going to let us cast our opponent's cards, but not all of them are going to let us do it for any color of mana. For card draw, we're going to start off with Altar's Reap and Costly Plunder, both of which are going to allow us to sacrifice a creature to draw 2 cards. Costly Plunder will also allow us to sacrifice an artifact for the same effect. Morbid Curiosity is going to have us sacrifice an artifact or a creature, and then we're going to draw cards equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. With all the sacrificing we've got going on, we might as well throw in a Skull Clamp for good measure. Skull Clamp is a 1 mana equipment that equips for 1 and gives equipped creature +1/-1 and says, whenever that creature dies, draw 2 cards. With all the sacrificing we've got going on, let's move to a section we're going to call Digging for Gold. First up, there's Viscera Seer and Ashnod's Altar. Both of them are going to let us sacrifice a creature. Viscera Seer says we'll scry 1. Ashnod's Altar is going to add 2 colorless to our mana pool. Then we've got Syndicate Trafficker and Defiant Salvager, which are both going to let us sacrifice an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on them. And then lastly in the sacrifice category, we've got Marionette Master, which is a 1/3 human artificer for 4 and 2 black. It has Fabricate 3, and whenever an artifact you control is put into the graveyard, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. Marionette Master is going to be an important part of the combo that we use to finish the game, but we will get back to that later. For now, let's keep the value train rolling as we move on to a section called I Wasn't Done With That Yet. First up in the recursion category, we've got Fortuitous Find, which is a sorcery that's going to allow us to return a creature and or artifact from our graveyard to our hand. Next up, we've got Blood for Bones and Rescue from the Underworld, which are both going to allow us to sacrifice a creature and return 2 creatures. Then there's Mere Retriever and Workshop Assistant, which are both going to return an artifact from our graveyard to our hand when they die. Next up, we've got a couple of complicated recursion engines in this deck with Scrap Trawler and Nim Deathmantle. Scrap Trawler is a 3/2 construct for 3 that says whenever it or another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact card in your graveyard with lesser converted mana cost. Nim Deathmantle is an equipment that's going to give the creature +2/+2, Intimidate, and make it a black zombie, but the important part is this middle text that says whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 4. If you do, return that card to the battlefield and attach Nim Deathmantle to it. Nim Deathmantle is another important piece of the combo that we're going to use to win the game at the end. Finally, we come to the end of the recursion package with Reanimate, Animate Dead, and Grim Return, all of which are going to let us put a creature from any graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. Speaking of creatures entering the battlefield, let's take a more dedicated look at Enters the Battlefield effects in a section I'm calling Triggered. To start us off in this section, we're going to look at the pride of Gonti's artifact collection, Panharmonicon. Panharmonicon is an artifact for 4 generic mana that says, if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Many Gonti decks that you run into in the wild are going to be built to abuse Panharmonicon. They're going to spend the early turns of the game tutoring for it, and then you're going to find that their deck is chock full of every enters the battlefield effect that they can have in mono black. Now, our deck isn't necessarily built to abuse Panharmonicon, but let's take a look at some of the effects that we're going to get benefits from if we have Panharmonicon on the battlefield. First up, there's Duplicant and Noxious Gear Hulk, which are both going to serve as removal for creatures. Then we've got Meteor Golem and Spine of Isha, which are going to help deal with other types of permanents. Then we've got a couple of token producers in Weaponcraft Enthusiast and Mere Battlesphere. We've seen a few constructs in the deck so far, but let's take a look at the rest of the creatures that are under construction. First up are Scrapyard Recombiner and Kuldotha Forge Master, which are both going to allow us to sacrifice an artifact to search up another artifact. Next up, we've got a couple of generically good constructs in Foundry Inspector, Steel Overseer, and Traxos Scourge of Krug. Next up are Hangerback Walker and Walking Ballista, which are both 0/0 constructs for XX, and they enter the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on them. When Hangerback Walker dies, we're going to put a Thopter out for each counter that was on Hangerback Walker, and for Walking Ballista, we can remove a counter and deal 1 damage to target creature or player. And let's not forget that Scrap Trawler, Workshop Assistant, Mere Battlesphere, and Noxious Gear Hulk are all constructs, and as such can be fetched out by Scrapyard Recombiner. When we aren't building our own death traps, we're going to steal our opponent's toys in a section called I'll Have What She's Having. Gonti isn't the only card in our deck that's going to allow us to play with our opponent's toys. First up, we've got Dead Man's Chest and Karu Mindeater. Dead Man's Chest is an aura that enchants a creature an opponent controls, and when that creature dies, we're going to exile cards equal to its power from the top of its owner's library, and you may cast non-land cards from among them as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast those spells. Whenever Karu Mindeater deals combat damage to a player, that player is going to exile a card from their hand face down, and we can look at and play cards exiled with Karu Mindeater. Next up, we've got Praetor's Grasp and Hedonist Trove. Praetor's Grasp is going to let us search target opponent's library for a card and exile it face down. We can look at and play that card for as long as it remains exiled. When Hedonist Trove enters the battlefield, it's going to exile all cards from target opponent's graveyard. We can play land cards exiled with Hedonist Trove, and we can cast non-land cards exiled with Hedonist Trove. But we can't cast more than one spell this way each turn. Next up are Mimic Vat, Puppeteer Click, and Mirage Mirror. Mimic Vat is going to allow us to make copies of creatures when they die. Puppeteer Click is going to enter the battlefield and give us a creature from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. And Mirage Mirror can tap for 2 and become a copy of target artifact, creature, enchantment, or land until end of turn. Finally, we've got 2 of the spiciest cards in the deck in Ritual of the Machine and Helm of Possession. Ritual of the Machine is a sorcery for 2 and 2 black. As an additional cost to play Ritual of the Machine, sacrifice a creature, gain control of target non-black, non-artifact creature. Helm of Possession is an artifact that costs 4 that we can choose not to untap during our untap step. For 2 tapping and sacrificing a creature, we can gain control of target creature for as long as we control Helm of Possession and it remains tapped. If we can't take their things, we'll just need to get rid of them, because if I can't have it, no one can. For removal in this deck, we've got Tragic Slip, Toxic Deluge, and Nevinyrral's Disc. With all the sacrifice going on in this deck, it's going to be very easy to trigger Tragic Slip. Toxic Deluge is, in my opinion, the best board wipe in the Commander format. Nevinyrral's Disc is an artifact that's going to enter the battlefield tapped, and we can use it to destroy all creatures, artifacts, and enchantments if we really need to reset the board. With all those neat moves out of the way, let's dive into Sensei's Secret Tech. As always, Sensei's Secret Tech is going to be my top 5 picks for the deck. Sometimes it's going to be flavor, sometimes it's going to be unique cards that you only see in my version, and otherwise it's going to be cards that are just plain gas. Let's go ahead and kick it off with number 5, Treacherous Urge. Treacherous Urge is an instant for 4 and a black that says target opponent reveals his or her hand. You may put a creature card from it into play under your control. That creature has haste and sacrifice it at the end of turn. This is a card I've never seen in any deck before, and I think it fits great with the flavor of this deck, as Gonti's going to go straight into your hand, learn what you've got going on in there, and he's going to steal a creature and put it into play under his control. Next up at the number 4 slot is Chaos Wand. Chaos Wand is an artifact for 3 mana that has the ability 4 and tap. Target opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then put the exiled cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom of that library in a random order. Chaos Wand is going to allow us to dig into our opponent's deck specifically for instant and sorcery spells. We're going to typically use this to try to hit a spell that we don't have access to in mono black. Maybe the green player can give us a ramp spell, the blue player can give us a draw spell. Heck, maybe we'll even hit a Swords to Plowshares or a Wrath of God off the white player's deck. Who knows what we're going to get? It's definitely spicy and it's definitely fun. Coming in at number 3 is going to be a new card from Commander 2019, Thieving Amalgam. Thieving Amalgam is a 6/7 ape snake for 5 and 2 black. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you manifest the top card of that player's library. Whenever a creature you control but don't own dies, its controller loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Thieving Amalgam is going to do double duty in our deck. On the one hand, it's going to steal cards off the top of our opponent's library and allow us to flip them if they are creatures. And whenever a creature we control but don't own dies, we're going to drain our opponents. I see this as an absolute win-win, and I think this card's going to be a staple in Gonti decks from now until the end of time. Moving on to number 2 is another card from Commander 2019. It's a land called Sanctum of Eternity. Sanctum of Eternity adds colorless mana, or for 2 and tap, you can return target commander you own from the battlefield to your hand. Activate this ability only during your turn. This is an excellent reusable way to bounce Gonti back into your hand to reuse that ability when he enters the battlefield. It doesn't take up a valuable slot anywhere else in the deck, you just throw it right in the mana base and move on with your life. I think this card is an absolute home run for any Gonti deck. And finally, the number one pick for the deck is Scheming Symmetry. Scheming Symmetry is a sorcery for 1 black. It says choose 2 target players. Each of them searches their library for a card, then shuffles their library and puts that card on top of it. Now, I'll be the first to admit that there are other cards that do a similar effect with a lot less downside. Number 1 being Vampiric Tutor, which doesn't force an opponent to search as well. But there are some tricksy things we can do with this card in Gonti in specific that I think make this card a slam dunk. First off, we could use this as a political tool, making deals with our opponents. I'll tutor for something that helps us out, and you tutor for something that helps us out as well. But even better, if we can catch our opponents unawares, we can go ahead and let them tutor for the best thing in their deck, put it on top of their library, then cast Gonti and go ahead and see what they thought was the best and maybe take it for ourselves. That added value with Gonti is the reason that this is Sensei's top pick for the deck. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and rush through the lands as quick as we can. First up, we've got Darksteel Citadel and Vault of Whispers, which are artifact lands. Then we've got Buried Ruin and Inventor's Fair. Buried Ruin can get an artifact back from our graveyard to our hand, and Inventor's Fair can tutor up an artifact to our hand. Then we've got some more generic lands that are going to allow us to tap for any color of mana, including Exotic Orchard, Spire of Industry, Glimmer Void, Mirrodin's Core, Ether Hub, and Grand Coliseum. We round out the rest of the deck with Swamps, and that's the mana base. And now let's go ahead and take a look at how we're going to win the game in Sensei's Signature Strikes. If we don't manage to eke out a win from our opponents by using their toys against them, we're going to go ahead and win with an artifact-based combo buried into the deck. Our combo is going to begin with Ashnod's Altar and Nim Deathmantle. Specifically, we're going to be looking to abuse the second piece of text on Nim Deathmantle that says, whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 4. If you do, return that card to the battlefield and attach Nim Deathmantle to it. If we combine this with a creature that creates at least 2 creature tokens when it enters the battlefield, we can abuse these enter the battlefield triggers to create infinite mana and infinite enters and leaves the battlefield triggers. 2 of the creatures we've got that are going to enter the battlefield and create at least 2 creature tokens are Weaponcraft Enthusiast and Mere Battlesphere. Weaponcraft Enthusiast can make 2 servos when it enters the battlefield, and Mere Battlesphere is going to create 4 1/1 colorless Mere Artifact creature tokens. Now let's go ahead and take a quick look at how the combo's actually going to work. If we have Ashnod's Altar and Nim Deathmantle on the battlefield, we're going to play Weaponcraft Enthusiast. It's going to enter the battlefield and make 2 servo tokens. Then we're going to sacrifice those 2 servo tokens to add 4 mana to our mana pool. Then we'll sack the Weaponcraft Enthusiast. Now we have 6 mana floating. We'll use 4 of that mana to activate Nim Deathmantle and return the Weaponcraft Enthusiast to the battlefield. When Weaponcraft Enthusiast enters the battlefield, it's going to create 2 servo tokens. We still have 2 mana floating. We're going to repeat the process and sacrifice the 2 servo tokens for 4 more mana. Then we'll sacrifice the Weaponcraft Enthusiast and pay 4 mana to return it back to the battlefield. We can continue this loop indefinitely and create both infinite mana and infinite enters and leaves the battlefield triggers. But how does this loop actually win us the game? For that, we're going to turn our attention to Marionette Master and Walking Ballista. First, we're going to look at Marionette Master, which says whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So, as we're sacrificing these servo tokens that Weaponcraft Enthusiast makes, they're also going to trigger Marionette Master, and that's going to drain our opponents an infinite amount of times and win us the game. Okay, I have to keep this in here because I'm just realizing it as I'm making this tech, but Marionette Master also enters the battlefield and creates 3 servo tokens, meaning it can go infinite with Ashnod's Altar and Nim Deathmantle all by itself. I didn't realize that until literally this moment while recording, so I wanted to go ahead and keep that in here because, as you can see, creativity can strike at any moment, and sometimes we realize stuff in decks that we didn't realize when we were putting it together. So yeah, we can use Weaponcraft Enthusiast, Mere Battlesphere, or even just Marionette Master itself to generate infinite mana, and with Marionette Master, we'll win the game. If we don't have Marionette Master on the battlefield, we can use that infinite mana we create to create an infinitely large Walking Ballista, and then use that to ping our opponents to death. I know what you're thinking, and I'll say it for you, But Sensei, you're being a scumbag again. This is another infinite combo. And to that I say, game's gotta end. We're not tutoring for any of these combo pieces. We're not built around this. But if we happen to get these pieces onto the board, oh yeah, we're gonna end the game if we can. As always, the budget report is calculated using TCG Player's Cart Optimizer, optimizing even for heavily played and damaged cards, because we're here to play jank, and you don't need to break the bank on jank. That being said, today's episode is going to kind of break the bank. This is a budgetless episode, and this deck is going to come in at $176.87. This definitely isn't a cheap deck tech, so for today's budget report, I thought I'd try a new thing, and I'm going to present you with the 5 most expensive cards, and then 5 cards that I would use to replace those cards if I were looking to cut a chunk out of the deck's cost. Alright, the 5 most expensive cards in the deck are going to be Toxic Deluge, Walking Ballista, Hangerback Walker, Reanimate, and Chromatic Lantern. To replace these cards, we're going to start off with Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat. Since we're cutting Walking Ballista, which is one of the outs with our infinite mana, we want to go ahead and replace that with some more abilities to still win the game. Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat, like Marionette Master, are going to drain our opponents when one of our creatures dies. The difference is they're not limited to just artifacts. Underhanded Designs is an enchantment for 1 and a black that says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. As long as we're using a creature that makes artifact tokens when it enters the battlefield for our Ashnod's Altar Nim Deathmantle loop, this is another outlet for our infinite mana that will win us the game. Next up, we have Mutilate, which is a sorcery for 2 and 2 black that says all creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn for each swamp you control. This is a great mono black budget alternative to Toxic Deluge. And then we have Abhorrent Overlord, which is going to enter the battlefield and put a number of 1/1 black harpy creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield equal to our devotion to black. This is another creature that will go infinite with Nim Deathmantle and Ashnod's Altar because it's going to create at least 2 black harpy creature tokens all by itself. The only problem is those harpies are not artifact tokens, so it won't win with Underhanded Designs or Marionette Master. But I figured since we're adding in Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat, it was safe to go ahead and add a card that's only going to work with those cards to actually win us the game. But if we're generating more than 2 tokens, we can also generate an infinite number of black harpy creature tokens that do have flying. So we should be able to use that to win the game if we have no other alternative. Since this is a no-budget deck this week, I saw no reason to really have any power-ups this week, but I did want to go ahead and talk about one card that is noticeably absent from this deck. Krark Clan Ironworks. Krark Clan Ironworks is an artifact for 4 mana that says, sacrifice an artifact, add 2 colorless to your mana pool. Without a doubt, KCI would make this deck much stronger and more consistent. It definitely fits in with the theme of sacrificing artifacts, and it's also another infinite mana engine. The only problem is, if I'm being totally honest, I don't understand how it works. I know that you can use Krark Clan Ironworks with Mirror Retriever and Scrap Trawler and Workshop Assistant to create some sort of infinite loop, but honestly, it's a little too complicated for my brain, and I don't want to have to deal with it. I think the deck works fine the way it is. If you want to add KCI in, feel free. It would probably be a great upgrade to the deck, but just know this is my channel, and I do what I want, and I don't want to do that. With that out of the way, that's all, folks. All right, Planeswalkers, thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. This has been another Top-Down Commander Deck Tech. I'm your sensei, AJ, and I just want to say thank you. And if you like what you saw today, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, share this video with your friends, hit the bell for notifications, and comment down below with anything that crosses your mind. Don't forget, if you want to get at me anywhere else, find me on Twitter at Magus of the Salt. Other than that, I'll see you back in the dojo next time. And until then, keep kicking ass.